Ladies and gentlemen, friends, dreamers, seekers, lean in, because today we're talking about something most people don't understand, and fewer still talk about openly. You see, we all crave love. Every human being, whether they show it or not, is wired for connection. But what happens when love feels unsafe? What happens when your deepest instinct is to run from the very thing you long for? That, my friends, is the world of the avoidant. Now, before you judge that word, before you slap a label on it and walk away, hear me. An avoidant is not broken. They are not cold. They are not incapable of love. They are simply human. Humans who learned somewhere along the way that love meant danger, that vulnerability brought pain, that closeness required a price too high to pay. Maybe it was inconsistent parenting, maybe it was betrayal, maybe it was being punished for needing someone. So they built a fortress not to hurt others, but to survive. But here's the magic. Here's what people don't see. When avoidants feel safe enough to love, truly safe, they don't just open the door, they dismantle the walls. Slowly, cautiously, but purposefully. They start showing up, not in grand gestures, but in consistent presence, in silent loyalty, in remembering the little things, in staying when every cell in their body is screaming to run. That, my friends, is their version of bravery. Because when avoidants feel safe, they love with depth, with deliberation. They don't take love lightly. They cherish it. They may not flood you with words, but when they look at you, you know. You feel it in your bones. They reveal, not everything at once, but what matters. The pain they never voiced, the fears they've hidden, the dreams they never believed they were allowed to have. They risk exposure because now love feels worth it. And here's something that will blow your mind. When avoidants feel safe enough to love, they become protectors of that safety. They show up for you the way they wish someone had shown up for them. They begin healing not just themselves, but generations of silence and disconnection. But here's the catch, and don't miss this. They don't arrive at safety by accident. It takes patience, it takes presence. It takes someone who doesn't poke the wound just to see it bleed. Someone who says, I see your fear, and I'm not running. You see, connection isn't built in a moment. It's built in a million small choices. To stay, to speak gently, to listen between the silences, to not take their withdrawal personally, to not try to fix them, but to understand them. So if you are an avoidant, I honor you. I see the battles you fight behind closed doors. And if you love someone who is, I invite you, be the safe harbor they've never had. Be the one who doesn't flinch when they reveal their storm. Because when avoidants feel safe enough to love, they love not just with their heart, but with their entire soul. And that, my friends, is a love worth waiting for. Thank you. Avoidants aren't unloving, they're self-protecting. That distinction is everything. For so long, society has painted avoidant individuals as cold, distant, emotionally unavailable, but that's not the full picture. What we label as avoidance is often a defense, a survival strategy rooted in experiences where love, vulnerability, or dependence equaled pain, confusion, or rejection. These individuals didn't wake up one day and decide to pull away from connection. Their nervous systems, their minds, and their hearts learned over time that closeness was a liability. And so, what looks like disinterest or detachment is actually a calculated effort to feel safe. Avoidance didn't get there by accident. Often, their early relationships taught them that needing someone was dangerous. Maybe they reached out as children and were met with inconsistency, criticism, or emotional withdrawal. Maybe they had caregivers who were physically present but emotionally absent, or who only responded when they performed, succeeded, or suppressed their needs. Over time, they learned to cope in silence, to minimize needs, to rely on themselves, to avoid the unpredictability that intimacy can bring. This wasn't a flaw. It was intelligence. It was resilience. They survived by learning to suppress vulnerability. So when people see avoidance pull away, go quiet, or retreat emotionally, what they're often witnessing is not indifference. It's a nervous system going into lockdown. It's an unconscious response to what feels like threat. That threat could be a partner getting too close, a conversation about feelings, or even a moment of genuine intimacy. Ironically, the very thing they want, closeness, can feel so foreign, so risky, that their body interprets it as danger. And so they do what they know, they create distance. This doesn't mean they lack emotion. In fact, many avoidants feel deeply. But they've trained themselves to contain those emotions, to keep them locked away where they can't be used against them. They've learned that expressing emotion leads to exposure, and exposure makes them vulnerable. Vulnerability, for someone who has learned to protect at all costs, feels unbearable. So instead of showing you how much they care, they might change the subject. They might go silent. They might appear cool, unaffected. Inside, though, they could be flooded with emotion. They just don't trust it enough to let it out. Avoidants are often highly self-reliant. They pride themselves on not needing others, not because they genuinely prefer isolation, but because depending on others has historically meant disappointment. If you've been let down enough times, the idea of needing someone becomes not just painful, it becomes intolerable. So they armor up, they carry their own weight, and they expect others to do the same, not because they don't care, but because they don't want to be caught off guard. They don't want to be left exposed. And they sure as hell don't want to feel that old wound reopen. Relationships challenge avoidance, not because they don't want to connect, but because the rules they've lived by, don't get too close, don't need anyone, don't let your guard down, begin to crack. Love, intimacy, and partnership push against their safety strategies. And this is where the misunderstanding often occurs. Partners may say, "Why won't you let me in?" Or "Why do you shut down when I need you most?" And the avoidant may not even have words for what they feel. They may not know how to say, "Because closeness terrifies me. Because I want to trust you, but my body doesn't know how." This is not about excuses, this is about understanding. You can't change what you don't understand. When you view avoidant behavior through the lens of self-protection rather than rejection, everything shifts. You stop seeing them as incapable of love, and you start seeing them as someone who learned to protect themselves by withdrawing from it. And here's the thing. That means it's possible to unlearn. It means they're not broken. It means that with awareness, with the right kind of support, and with enough safety, those protective walls can begin to soften. Because the avoidant isn't pushing love away because they don't care. They're doing it because somewhere deep down, they care so much it hurts. And that's what they've been guarding all along. Safety is the doorway to their vulnerability. For people with avoidant attachment patterns, vulnerability isn't something they resist because they don't want it. It's something they resist because for them, vulnerability has always been tied to risk, to danger, to instability. So when we talk about creating safety for an avoidant person to open up emotionally, we're not talking about a nice to have condition. We're talking about the one and only foundation upon which real connection with them can be built. Without safety, they retreat. With it, they transform. The avoidant nervous system is constantly scanning for signs of emotional threat. These signs don't have to be dramatic. It could be someone getting too close too fast. It could be a partner asking for emotional availability in a tone that feels demanding. It could be moments when they feel they are being backed into a corner, where their emotional freedom is threatened. In those moments, the avoidant reaction kicks in, not because they don't want to engage, but because they're wired to protect themselves from what feels like potential harm. The body overrides logic. It initiates retreat. And without safety, that retreat becomes a pattern. But safety, real safety, not just comfort, but emotional safety, is the thing that can interrupt this cycle. Safety looks like patience, consistency, presence without pressure. It looks like someone showing up in a way that doesn't demand instant openness, but instead invites it over time. Someone who doesn't react to withdrawal with anger or guilt trips, but with understanding and steadiness. Safety to an avoidant isn't built in big emotional moments. It's built in the quiet ones, in the steady rhythm of someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, and doesn't shame. Avoidants tend to equate emotional closeness with a loss of control. They've learned that being open often meant being overwhelmed, invalidated, or even punished. So when someone approaches them with raw emotion, even good emotion, they might shut down, not because they don't feel, but because they don't know how to process feeling and stay grounded at the same time. Safety allows them to learn that emotions can rise without drowning them. That being close to someone doesn't mean disappearing into them or being devoured by their needs. Safety is what allows the avoidant to stay present in discomfort instead of fleeing it. When an avoidant feels emotionally safe, their body no longer perceives closeness as a threat. Their breathing slows, their mind calms, they don't have to prepare for disappointment, they don't have to analyze every word for hidden meaning, they don't have to keep one foot out the door just in case. And in that state, their real self can begin to emerge, the one that wants love, craves intimacy, and has always longed to be seen and held. But it doesn't happen all at once. Safety for an avoidant is built slowly, layer by layer. That's how you build safety for an avoidant. Not by suddenly putting a wetsuit on and suddenly putting a wetsuit on and suddenly putting a wetsuit on so they can feel safe. And then they can be vulnerable. That's how you build safety for an avoidant. Calm intention. It starts when they notice that your reactions are different from what they expected. They may pull back, and instead of being punished or shamed, they're met with calm. They may express a little bit of truth, and instead of it being used against them later, it's honored. These small moments add up. Over time, their nervous system begins to relax. It starts rewriting the story. Maybe this is different. Maybe it's safe enough to stay. Maybe it's okay to be seen here. What's important to understand is that avoidants don't test safety consciously. They're not playing games or trying to manipulate. But because of their past experiences, they observe, they wait, they watch for the inevitable turning point where things become unsafe again. They often expect it. They've been through it. But when that moment doesn't come, when the person stays steady, keeps showing up, keeps responding with compassion, the avoidant begins to build trust, not just in the other person, but in themselves. Trust that they can show up and not lose themselves. Trust that connection doesn't mean danger. Safety opens the door to vulnerability by first proving that there will be no punishment for honesty, no exploitation of openness, no weaponizing of emotion. The avoidant needs to know that they can say, "I'm not ready," and not be abandoned. That they can take a step forward, and if they need to pause or step back, the whole thing won't collapse. When this kind of environment exists, something remarkable happens. The avoidant stops managing the relationship with fear. They start engaging with it through choice. They begin to risk presence, risk emotion, risk being truly seen. Love from an avoidant is deep, deliberate, and loyal. It doesn't always show up in the ways people expect. It might not be verbal declarations or overflowing physical affection. It might not come wrapped in dramatic expressions or constant validation. But when an avoidant chooses to love, it's never casual. It's never impulsive. It's a conscious act, often born from an internal battle between fear and desire. When they let someone in, it's because they've weighed the risk, measured the cost, and still decided to take the leap. That kind of love is not shallow. It's rooted, it's precise, it's fiercely intentional. Avoidants don't fall into love without thought. They aren't swept away by feelings without resistance. Love doesn't pull them blindly, it confronts them. It brings them face to face with everything they've spent years trying to avoid. Control, vulnerability, dependence, unpredictability. So when an avoidant stays, when they commit, when they let themselves feel, understand that this is not a small step. This is not a minor act. It is a seismic shift inside of them. It is a decision that carries immense weight, because for the avoidant, love is not just about giving affection. It's about surrendering control. This is why love from an avoidant may not look romantic in the traditional sense. They may not be the first to say, I love you. They may struggle to initiate physical closeness or express their feelings openly. But they show love in the way they think ahead for you, in the way they pay attention to your needs, even when they don't speak about their own, in the way they respect your boundaries because they know what it's like to need, in the way they follow through on what they say. Because commitment for them isn't about saying the right words. It's about doing the right thing. Loyalty is one of the most misunderstood traits of the avoidant. People assume that because they fear intimacy, they're not dependable. But the opposite is often true. Once an avoidant feels secure and chooses to commit, their loyalty runs deep. They've already done the work of analyzing the relationship from every angle. They've considered the risks, the exits, the escape plans. So if they're still there, it means they're in it fully. They might not verbalize this, they might not need constant reassurance, but their loyalty is expressed in consistency, in presence, and in showing up when it truly matters. Avoidants are observers. They pay close attention. Even when they don't speak, they notice. They study you. They learn your patterns. They remember the things you say in passing. They may not always respond with outward affection, but they often respond with thoughtful actions. Maybe they bring you something you mentioned once without making a big deal out of it. Maybe they show up when you didn't ask them to. Maybe they silently do something that makes your life easier. These are not small things. These are the avoidance language of love. Quiet but intentional. Reserved but deeply sincere. What makes love from an avoidant so deliberate is that they don't give it freely to everyone. Trust must be earned. Space must be respected. If you've made it through those walls, it means something significant. It means you've become a part of their inner circle, a space they protect with everything they have. And once you're there, they will protect you in the same way. They won't broadcast their loyalty, but they will live it. They'll be the one who has your back, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. When others walk away, the avoidant who loves you will still be standing there. They are not the ones who chase every emotional wave. They don't get swept into intensity for the sake of excitement. They value peace, stability, and clarity. Their love is a decision they renew day after day in small acts of respect and consistency. They don't play games. If they've chosen you, it's because they believe in something real. It's because they've moved through fear, resisted the urge to flee, and found something in you that makes staying feel worth it. This is a kind of love that doesn't come with fireworks, but with foundation. It is not love that seeks to consume or overwhelm. It's love that grounds, that steadies, that stays. Love from an avoidant is a slow burn, but it's one that lasts. It doesn't demand attention or applause. It grows quietly, steadily, beneath the surface, and once it takes root, it is almost unshakable. They open up slowly, but with profound authenticity. For someone with avoidant tendencies, revealing themselves emotionally is not something that happens quickly or easily. It's not about withholding for the sake of control or manipulation. It's about protection. Emotional openness feels like exposure, and exposure has often meant pain, judgment, or abandonment. So when an avoidant begins to open up, it means they are not just taking a risk. They are stepping into unfamiliar territory, often fighting against years of conditioning that taught them to stay guarded at all costs. The process is not linear. They don't go from closed off to open overnight. It's gradual. It might begin with small, seemingly insignificant disclosures, a casual comment about their past, a subtle shift in how they respond when asked personal questions, a moment when they don't deflect or change the subject. These little windows into their inner world are not random. They are tests, often unconscious, to see how their vulnerability will be received. If it's met with judgment or pressure, they retreat. If it's met with patience and presence, they take another step forward. Avoidants are deeply introspective, even if they rarely show it. They think carefully before they speak. They analyze their own emotions before deciding to share them. When they do speak from a place of vulnerability, it is rarely off the cuff. It is thoughtful, considered, and meaningful. This doesn't mean they're emotionless. It means their emotions run so deep that exposing them feels like handing over a fragile part of themselves. When they do, they're not looking for pity or rescue. They're looking for safety, for understanding, for connection that doesn't overwhelm or threaten their sense of autonomy. Because of this, their authenticity can be striking. Once an avoidant chooses to open up, they don't sugarcoat their truth. They don't give you half answers or watered down versions of their feelings. They tell you what's real. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it comes in quiet statements, subtle truths that carry a lot of weight. They might tell you about a childhood memory they've never shared. They might admit that something hurt them when they previously acted indifferent. They might finally articulate the fears that have shaped how they show up in love. And when they do, it is not a performance. It's a breakthrough. What makes this authenticity profound is the contrast between how little they usually share and how real it is when they finally do. There is no pretense, no need to impress, no desire to be anything other than who they truly are in that moment. Their guard might still be partly up, but they're letting you in, not all at once, but in layers. Each layer is an invitation. Each truth they reveal is a signal that they're choosing connection over safety, presence over avoidance, courage over habit. They are risking being seen, not because it's easy, but because something in you feels worth the risk. This slowness is often mistaken for disinterest or emotional unavailability, but what it really is precision. They are not going to share just for the sake of intimacy. They are going to share when it matters, when it's real, when it's honest. Their timeline isn't about playing hard to get. It's about making sure they're giving you something true, not something reactive or performative. They want to know that what they offer will be respected, that it won't be used against them, that it's going to land in safe hands. As their trust deepens, so does their openness. You'll begin to see more of their personality, more of their sense of humor, more of their hopes and fears. They might start initiating conversations they used to avoid. They might ask deeper questions. They might even start talking about the future in ways that once felt too vulnerable. Every step they take is significant. Every moment of openness is a milestone. They may still struggle with retreating in times of stress, but the direction is forward. They are learning moment by moment that being known is not inherently dangerous. The beautiful paradox is that the more safety they feel, the more space they create for their full self to emerge. The more they open, the more they connect. Not just with you, but with parts of themselves they may have hidden even from their own awareness. And what comes through is a love that is raw, grounded, and powerfully real. Not polished, not perfect, but deeply human and entirely their own. Consistency and patience unlock their capacity to love. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, love is not a spontaneous outpouring of emotion. It is a slow awakening that happens when they realize over time that they are truly safe. That realization doesn't come from grand gestures or declarations of affection. It comes from repeated moments of emotional steadiness. From someone being where they said they would be, from words that match actions, from emotional energy that doesn't spike and crash depending on the mood or moment. The avoidant person notices these patterns even if they don't say much about them. It's in these moments that they begin to lower their defenses and consider the possibility of real connection. Avoidants expect volatility. They anticipate rejection. They're used to emotional inconsistency. So when someone enters their life and consistently offers presence, calm, and clarity, it throws them off at first. Not because they don't want it, but because they've learned to prepare for the opposite. That preparation can look like emotional distance, sarcasm, withdrawal, or even pushing the other person away just to see if they'll stay. This isn't manipulation. It's a coping mechanism built over years of learned self-protection. If someone can hold steady through that storm, it begins to shift the dynamic. It begins to soften the protective walls that once felt like the only way to survive. Patience is what allows this process to unfold. It's not passive. It's not about waiting quietly in the background. It's about actively choosing to understand that love for the avoidant happens at a different pace. It's not that they don't feel. It's that their emotions often emerge after they've had time to process them privately. They're not comfortable with intensity that demands immediate reciprocity. They're not wired to trust quickly. But give them time, give them space without pressure, and they'll start to show up in ways that are undeniably real. The transformation doesn't come from forcing closeness. It comes from allowing closeness to develop at a pace they can emotionally manage. When someone is consistent, it calms the avoidant's hyper-awareness of potential danger. That consistency tells them again and again that the person in front of them is not here to control, abandon, or invade. It tells them they're allowed to breathe, that they can take a risk without losing themselves. This creates a powerful shift. Instead of reacting from fear, they begin responding from choice. They start showing up because they want to, not because they're avoiding a consequence or trying to meet an expectation. That kind of willingness is foundational to real love. It's easy to assume that love should be fast, expressive, and obvious, but with avoidance, love is revealed more through subtlety than spectacle. It's in how they begin to prioritize you in their schedule, how they remember small things you said and act on them without calling attention to it, how they start to let you into spaces they once kept private. It's slow, but it's sincere. Each step forward is hard-earned and intentional. The more patience they're met with, the more secure they become in their ability to connect. They start to learn that love doesn't have to mean loss of independence or emotional chaos. It can be something steady, something trustworthy. Patience also means allowing the avoidant to stumble without condemning them. They may withdraw at times. They may need solitude to recalibrate. They may struggle with conflict or emotional discussions, but how those moments are handled becomes part of their internal map of safety. If they're met with panic or punishment, they shut down. If they're met with understanding and calm boundaries, they gradually learn that closeness can coexist with emotional freedom. That kind of reassurance isn't always verbal. It's in energy, body language, tone. It's in what you do when they're overwhelmed and how you respond when they come back. What starts to emerge when consistency and patience are given is a different version of the avoidant than most people ever get to see. This version is thoughtful, affectionate, in subtle but meaningful ways, deeply loyal, and highly aware of the connection they've allowed into their life. Their love may never look like emotional fireworks, but it will look like someone showing up for you without being asked. Like someone making you part of their world, not through words, but through actions. Like someone who, after years of running, has finally decided to stay. And when they stay with intention, with depth, and with a quiet kind of devotion that can only grow in the presence of consistency and patience.